So welcome, folks. My name is Thomas Murray. I am one of the core faculty here at Equitech Futures, and as an example of my communicating innovation class, I have put together this masterclass called Why the Audience Seems to Hate You and How to Fix It. There are common mistakes that even the most accomplished public speakers make that can alienate audiences. And so I want to look at some actionable tips on how we can improve engagement and connection, and also look at what are some of those reasons why it may seem like the audience disconnects. So I ask you first, have you ever given a presentation and felt like the audience was plotting against you? Perhaps you looked out and you wound up seeing these eyes just staring back at you with no emotion whatsoever. And you worried, is it me? Are they judging me? Is there something going on with the way that I look or how I'm dressed or how I said hello, where they're just not giving me anything back? I ask you, have you ever felt like the audience already disliked you before you even started speaking? For instance, maybe you looked out and folks were just kind of like holding their heads up with their hands, kind of smushing their faces, trying to get through the day, or were looking down at their phone rather than looking at you. Maybe in an even worse situation, you looked out and found someone had just totally lost consciousness. Maybe you even heard the snore coming from within the audience, and you were like, oh dear, I just want to get off the stage as fast as possible. Maybe it's even been worse than that. Maybe you put an entire room unconscious with the last few people struggling to hang on, and you felt like, what is wrong with me? Zaina, thank you for adding to the chat that, yeah, as a teacher especially, and you've been a science teacher before, to be able to try to captivate an audience of young people, and find that you're failing at that. I have been there too. What I have found is that many speakers over the course of their sharing unknowingly turn off their audience. And there is science behind why this happens. And so throughout this session, I'm hoping that we can explore how we can overcome some of those challenges. But before we dive into those, I want to open up this chat. Think back, and can you identify one thing that you may have done in a presentation that you felt might have caused disengagement? For those of you who are nodding along, like, yes, I've looked out at the audience and I've seen that. Yeah, what did you perceive you might have been doing? Linda mentions in the chat, talking too much. This feeling like you've been going on and on without engaging, without reaching back. Nice, and there's some agreement around that. Agrie, you said you added a meme that you thought was funny, but no one laughed. That is when we include a joke, we're taking a risk, right? And not having that reaction, that's tough. Maria mentioning speaking too fast, or when you're talking about technical stuff that people aren't interested in. There's something on the nose about that that we'll get into today, not just about pace, but about the content and how we speak about what we're talking about. Remy mentioned I was standing in for someone. Can I ask you to kind of just unmute, tell us a little bit what that circumstance was and how you felt like it shifted the audience?
Yeah, sure. So my friend was invited to speak at a community to give insights about a particular service in AWS, but then he couldn't do that. So he asked me to stand in for him. So the moment the audience knew they aren't going to have the presentation from my friend, but me, I felt everyone shut down, and now I had to bring them back to the topic.
Ah,
It wasn't easy.
it's that if any of you have ever gone to see a performance, a theater production or something, where you're really excited about someone starring in the cast, and you get inside and you open your playbill, and there's just a little piece of paper that says that person who you were so excited to see, that celebrity or someone, will be played by someone else tonight. There will be an understudy that goes on. And yeah, it sounds like there is that immediate change in expectations, Remy, that you felt from the audience kind of sitting differently in their seat going, oh, I have the second stringer. I have the understudy that's here with me. Um, there's something tethered to that, which we'll also get into, which is this sense of apologizing before you begin. You haven't even said anything yet. Hi, I didn't prepare very much for this. So if you'll all bear with me with and it's, suddenly the audience goes, oh dear. Or you even sense them tense up a little bit because suddenly they're not in the position of just receiving your knowledge or receiving the message that you're hoping to communicate. Some amount of their emotional bandwidth has to be worried about you. Are you prepared enough to be able to get across what it is that they came to see? So many other great things offered in the chat. Zaina, not making what I was talking about relatable to my audience. Dharma saying that the PowerPoint, the slides are too wordy, maybe too much jargon or whatnot. Maria, hard to guess what the audience actually wants to hear or cares about. So you tend to talk a lot, hoping something sticks, but it only confuses people. Oh gosh, I can relate to that. And that's a nervous response, right? That comes up. So all of these things are natural. They do not, consign you to being awful public speakers, but they're little less than best practices. That it's great that we can already identify what some of these are. Oh, Megan, talking about reading the data directly off the slides rather than letting folks read for themselves. Lone, you talk about going on a tangent. And the similarities, each of you talking about similarities. Ronnie, unlike the audience, I didn't consider what I was presenting as being very serious. Oh, Ronnie, could you speak just a little bit to that? Are you in a place where you can unmute and speak to that?
Okay. Hello, everyone. So we had a project review, and there were concerns about performance across different teams. Therefore, as a supervisor, I was invited by my supervisor now to give an explanation why that was the situation. And I felt that what they were considering as being poor performance was not that of a concern at that particular time in the project. And unfortunately, they really felt like I had let them down. I didn't consider that as something that should be taken seriously. So at the end of it, while I was presenting, everybody was just looking at me with blank faces. And I noted this later on when I talked to someone that asked what went wrong. I thought I was just giving a normal update, and they felt like whatever you are saying, you are not serious at all. They didn't mean, they just said you are not serious at all. Yeah.
So misalignment with what the audience's expectation was of the speaker being the voice for that particular topic, taking it with the seriousness, you say, the gravity that the audience wants you to have. And yeah, that misalignment, and oftentimes we can read that misalignment immediately. And then what do we do? So let's talk a little bit more. Thank you all so much for adding those to the chat. Thank you, Ronnie and Remy, for speaking up a bit more. Oh, and Trishti, yours too. Going back to my reference paper too much. I have a script that I need to follow so that I don't get off track. And so, hello. And then you move back and move back and move back. And every time that you go back to your reference paper, you are disconnecting on some level from the audience, right? That can also be. So good. We already have identification, maybe even some fears from previous experiences of when we have felt that disengagement. Let's talk a little bit about what some of those kind of scientifically proven reasons are. And one of the most popular, we already had a couple of you talking about things being overly complex, overly technical, not relatable. This is cognitive overload, where too much information, either too quickly or too complexly, overwhelms the brain. And that will always lead to some degree of disengagement. Cognitive overload is mental exhaustion. And when we are, think about that last spurt of work before you're about to go on a vacation and you're like pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's ultimately you're finding it difficult to process and retain new information effectively. Your brain is trying to handle too much information at once. Certainly, we've all felt that kind of decreased performance, difficulty concentrating. I'm going to give an example. I don't mean to throw this guy under the bus, but this was a video clip I had found about something that, frankly, I don't know anything about. And so therefore, some of you may know the topic, but let's look at it and then revisit afterward what I mean about cognitive overload.
Yeah, the most common misunderstanding is to conflate the simulation hypothesis with the simulation argument. The simulation hypothesis is the statement that we are living in a computer simulation. I think that is less than 50% likely to be the case. However, I do believe in the simulation argument, which shows or purports to show that one of three propositions is true. One of which is the simulation hypothesis. But then there are these other two propositions as well that also are alternatives. The possibility that almost all civilizations go extinct before reaching technological maturity, and the possibility that there is this strong convergence among all technologically mature civilizations such that they all lose interest in creating ancestor simulations. And it's hard for people to keep those two ideas apart. I think there is a kind of complexity limit in a lot of media communication.
I'm going to stop it there. Is there anybody else on this call who doesn't quite understand what the topic that he's talking about at this point is? Show of hands. Oh, everybody gets it. Is it just, no, okay, great. I was like, is it just me who doesn't understand simulation? Now, let me point out a few things that I think he does fine. He's not talking too fast. He's talking, at a regular cadence. And ultimately, I think he is questing to try to communicate this sense of difference between these two topics. Does anybody want to volunteer anything that they heard or saw or sensed being the audience to that, where they're like, getting at why you didn't understand or what you think might have made it clearer? Agrie.
I think in this video there was a lack of voice modulation. So he spoke in the same tone throughout the video, and I didn't understand where one of the point where hypothesis, like this simulation hypothesis ended, and where the next point started. So there should have been a nicer break between the two, and also some change in the voice where he starts speaking about the other thing.
Okay, so getting at this kind of sense of likability and modulation of being able to understand with clarity, maybe with something compelling about why this guy cares about this. You weren't able to necessarily get that, and that there wasn't enough separation. Layla.
Hi, everyone. Well, I felt that something was cut out at the beginning, so I'm lacking a bit of context to start with. And then second, I would have appreciated some type of analogies, for example, to be able to follow before switching from one type to another type, then probably having an explanation of each or an example.
Absolutely. And ultimately, just so as to let this guy off the hook, I did excerpt something right from the middle of his talk. So ultimately, if you'd had something earlier on, perhaps even with the totality of this, you'd be able to understand it better. And yet, there was a little bit of a break, right, in between those two. MacArthur.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Good to hear you.
Okay. Yeah. There were too many big words in this for me. I'm not a native English speaker, and I know there was simulation hypothesis. I've even forgotten the second one. That's how big the words were.
Argument.
It was a
Yeah.
collection of big words, and it's very difficult to digest all that. Like the concept itself is new to me, and then there are also these big words thrown in there. So I don't know, what do I process now? Do I process the new concept? Do I process the new words? What am I supposed to be processing here?
I am so glad that you brought that up, MacArthur, because you don't have to be a non-native English speaker. You can be a native English speaker like myself and still be turned kind of inside out by this. Because you're right, there was a lot of complex vocabulary, terminology, jargon. And even when he winds up talking about whether it's true that all of us live inside of a computer simulation, the way that he said that felt not true to him was saying something along the lines of, I believe that to be less than 50% possible, which is a statistical kind of like overly complex way of saying, I don't believe that that's likely. It felt to me a little unnecessary, but for sure, he winds up using a lot of jargon. And jargon, of course, being language that we are used to within a particular domain setting, being able to have this kind of shorthand, but that to outsiders is impenetrable, industry specific, particularly high level. And so, thus, as we think about the cognitive overload with this, some of the simple takeaways are that less is more. Simplifying your message. This was something that some of you had said were things that you recognized didn't happen in speeches where you had the audience disengaged. Limiting the number of key ideas that you're aiming to present so that you have, somewhere between 3 to 5 takeaways from the entire presentation, because trying to cover too many topics will dilute the impact of your message. There are those who talk about this 10, 20, 30 rule, that a presentation that you're giving should have no more than 10 slides, last no longer than 20 minutes, and use a font size no smaller than 30 points in order to try to maintain focus and clarity. I'm already going to confess to you, I'm breaking that rule in this particular presentation today, but it's a good practice in general. When we think about, and certainly any of you who have watched television news have come across some channel somewhere where there's so many different talking heads and scrolling chyrons and updating screens. And it leads to this overload that likely causes us to change the channel or feel like we're missing something. We're not smart enough to understand something. We're getting too much at once. We're not quick enough to understand something. And audiences don't like to be made to feel stupid. And so trying to think about them and craft our scripts such that we are taking simplicity as our goal will help bridge that gap. Okay. There's also sometimes a lack of connection that happens. Building rapport, connecting emotionally with your audience is important. And that was something that Agrier wound up pointing out with that last speaker. It felt like he didn't know entirely what he was talking about, or he didn't care as much about what he was talking about. And I would read into that he also didn't fully communicate what was important or exciting about that to the audience. And so therefore you were left wanting around that. People do tune out when they feel that the speaker doesn't care about them or isn't relatable. If I were to be a boss coming into a meeting and saying something like, "Hello, I am Mr. Murray, and I am a manager here, and it has come to my attention that a discrepancy exists within the current operational procedures, and that necessitates an immediate review, and we must make potential adjustments to ensure optimal efficacy in the forthcoming project phases." Do you feel any sense of connection with me? Do I seem like someone that you can come to with a problem? Or Rifat mentions, in the chat, why do I know people who speak exactly like that? Again, not a situation where I was speaking overly fast, throwing a ton of information at you, although I would probably wager that I was speaking particularly complex, with an unnecessary complexity and no connection with who my team is. One way of fixing that is recognizing that audiences are always seeking connection. They're always wanting to know who the speaker is, what they care about, and are hoping to be drawn into a situation, into a problem. So maybe a flip side of problem solving would be something like this. So, team, there is a baker that I know, and her name is Emma, and she wakes up at 3 a.m. every morning in order to knead her dough and prepare her pastries and open her bakery at the crack of dawn. Now, her shop has become the heartbeat of its community, and it is a place where neighbors can gather for coffee and conversation and fresh croissants that she's baked. But just as her bakery was thriving in this community, would you believe disaster struck? If I stopped right there, are you, as a fellow team member, interested in wanting to get to the bottom of what was plaguing Emma and how we can be the people to help her? Yes, okay, cool. So storytelling and empathy can create that kind of emotional bond from the start. But not everything has to be a narrative either. Just being able to connect with your own passion to the topic at hand can be enough to kind of bridge that gap. Let's talk a little bit about how that manifests itself. And that's an area that I like to call inconsistent body language. Mixed signals between what we're saying and what we're seeing ultimately creates distrust or confusion. Have any of you ever had a boss, a friend, someone who is like deliberately understated, where they go, "Oh, really? I'm so excited. That's so great. Cool. And you can just hear in the tone of their voice that it doesn't connect. It's not there. Um, eye contact can be a powerful nonverbal tool for establishing trust and connection with an audience. And so, as Shrishti was talking about in terms of referencing her papers, if you avoid eye contact or you're constantly looking down, it might make you feel evasive or insecure or disengaged. I even, back in the day when I used to coach actors, we used to say that at a pensive moment where you're receiving a question and you're trying to think about how you're going to respond, our default, many of us, our default is to look down at the ground and think about it and then look back up when you've got an answer. And a subtle shift, instead of looking down, to look up. And you can search the ceiling for your answer, or search the wall or something. But what seems to be to you, as my audience right now, the difference in your accessibility to me with this versus with this? Anyone have an idea? Yeah, Rifat.
I think when you're looking down, it comes across as a form of lack of confidence, as if like you're like questioning or kind of lost in that question. And when you look up, it kind of feels more open, more exploratory, that you're kind of trying to still look for the answer, but you're coming from a more open approach. So the body language kind of seems more open and exploratory with the latter.
Yes, absolutely. And Ayushi, did you have something you want to add to that?
Very similar to what Rifat had said, but just in addition, I think when you're looking down, it also feels like as a speaker you have shut off, and as a listener, I'm intruding on a moment that I'm not supposed to be. Like suddenly I'm unwelcome, and that's your own personal space and time, and I should let you be and not be there.
Interesting. Absolutely. And Zaina.
And we may bring this up, but when you said inconsistent body language, one thing I thought about was early on in my speaking career, I remember that I was a very animated speaker. So I would sometimes move my hands a lot, which could be at times very distracting when I was trying to give a talk or a presentation. So people would be trying to listen to me, or I would be talking about a topic, but people were paying more attention to the movements I was making than what I was actually saying. And sometimes things would get lost in translation because my hands were doing one thing while what I was speaking about wasn't really matching up with each other.
Yeah, for sure. And it can read potentially as uncertainty or nervousness. That's kind of like, oh my gosh, as long as I'm throwing my gestures around, then therefore I must be connecting and be charismatic. But right, when it's disconnected, it winds up becoming a hindrance. It puts a barrier. It's something to watch. I've got another example of that I'll give in a moment. But I also want to validate what Ayushi and Rifat had said. Yeah, when we look down, we close off because the most expressive parts of our language centers are our eyes and our mouth. And we want, as an audience, to be able to see those. And when we look down, we take those away. Whereas looking up, they're still totally visible. So you are seeing the speaker's thought process as they're moving through it. And that alone, even if they don't say anything, communicates to you that there's a mind at work. And we can relate to that because we also have our minds at work. So yeah, inconsistent body language. I also mean, and this may be going back to the speaker we watched earlier, this kind of stillness when the text suggests otherwise. Team, this is a really big thing. It's earth-shattering. Nothing will ever be the same, and we are going to change the world. Do we believe that? There can also be an overkill in trying to relate. And smiling, likability, usually will get you by. But what if the situation doesn't call to that? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me here today. Unfortunately, the plane crash last night was absolutely a tragic and regrettable circumstance. Yeah, there were 195 souls on board, and they all perished. Let their memories be a comfort to all of us in this terrible time. And thank you for your attention. Yeah, who is that person? Right, yeah, that Remy, right, that sense where you're enjoying giving sad news. Rifat, you said RoboCop versus Harley Quinn. What does that mean?
Bad joke, probably. But the first person that you kind of imitated, it seemed very emotionless.
Right.
That someone's very robotic. And the latter one was absolutely, I don't know, completely detached from any sort of emotional intelligence, that the person is not even able to, almost psychotic, right? So yeah, it's kind of scary that the person is not able to empathize with the news or the gravity of the news at all. So yeah.
Yeah. You're right. Those were absolutely two extremes in a way. There's also, and this is maybe starting to speak a little bit as well to what Zaina was talking about in terms of gestures in the class. What if someone was coming to give you a briefing at a big team meeting and they went, "Hey folks, so our executive leadership is entirely certain and unanimously behind this merger, and we know that it is going to bring greater prosperity to all of our members of our team, and we are excited about the possibilities that lie ahead." Do we believe that person? I mean, the words coming out of their mouth sounded convincing, right? What didn't we believe? Ayushi, yeah.
They sounded like they were in a hurry to get somewhere, and this was a news just to keep us distracted while they go off and do whatever it is that they want to. Like the
So there was
speed inflections, yeah.
speed.
And also the pen clicking was very distracting.
Yeah, it's distracting. It was in a hurry. Did the pen clicking, here's what my intention was with the pen clicking, was that it also looked like I was fidgeting in a way that like I didn't actually fully believe what it was that I was saying too. Yeah, Megan, you didn't care about the outcome. Communicating this was not a priority. Agrier says the tone did not feel as if it was empathetic. Yeah. But yeah, sometimes fidgeting, we're going to ground what it is we're saying, but ultimately what else we're doing in the frame winds up suggesting, hey, that speaker seems like he's not at ease in the way that he's clicking the pen, tossing it between. If he actually was secure, confident about what it is he was talking about, he wouldn't have to be quite so fidgety. Maybe the opposite extreme from Zaina's thing about over gesturing. What about this? "Hello, I'm Thomas, and I'm here to connect with you, my team, on how we can better work together." Megan says AI Thomas. Anyone want to? Layla says too forced. Megan, what does AI Thomas seem like to you?
I always felt like at some point in like middle management, they scoop out their frontal lobe of emotion and they just are like a data control center of information. And there's really like you said, they could be, telling someone that their parents were just killed in a horrific plane crash, but because they don't want the company to be at fault for communicating this information, they'll just roboticize it as much as possible. So it's just communication and there's no humanity, a human element, connection, empathy involved with that at all. That's AI Thomas.
That's amazing. And yeah, others are saying politician Thomas, Johnny Bravo Thomas. And Emma talks about it seems controlled and impersonal. Yes, but what I was trying to communicate was the sense of rehearsed gestures. Maybe I notated hello, then wave. Okay, I'm Thomas, and I'm here to connect with you. Point. My team on how we can better work together. Do an interlocked hands. Okay, great. Yeah, but it doesn't, like, that's not, everything about it read ick to you. You didn't trust me. And so even my quick forced smile at the end was not able to overcome what was truly kind of disconnected and non-fluid. I'm going to show a video. This is a relatively famous video of someone making what we would call a less than perfect apology. I'd love for you to get at what feels inconsistent in this. Oh.
I've made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment, and I don't expect to be forgiven. I'm simply here to apologize. So what we came across that day in the woods was obviously unplanned, and the reactions you saw on tape were raw, they were unfiltered. None of us knew how to react or how to feel. I should have never posted the video. I should have put the cameras down and stopped recording what we were going through. There's a lot of things I should have done differently, but I didn't. And for that, from the bottom of my heart, I am sorry.
Anybody here believe that apology? No. Okay. What Emma says, are we sure that he's apologizing? Yeah, great. What do we think ultimately feels insincere about this? Maria, would you speak to what you had said?
Yeah, there are like several pauses where his eyes would wander around, so it looks like he's trying to recall what he's about to say. So it kind of looks like it's already scripted or pre-written before. So it came off insincere.
Yeah, Dharma, you said the same thing. You felt like he was reading a text. Shrishti, yeah, feels detached somehow. Agri, I was hooked, but that was because he's talking about what he was talking about is or was more interesting than how he talked about it. Zweli, you talk about no remorse. What feels, can I ask you to unmute and say what feels like no remorse?
The first part of it, the first part of the video just sounds like that man was forced, like you said before. He really doesn't care about what he's saying right now. He's just been forced maybe by the PR team or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Others of you are saying, Zaina, his tone of voice was flat. Nima, you said his facial expressions don't match his speech. Ayushi, you talk about too much eye contact for me. Right. That's actually disconcerting. You would think that making eye contact would be something that would allow one to, it's not avoiding the camera like we were doing earlier, but there's this lock into the camera and then that flat voice that Zaina points out and whatnot, and we don't actually get, we don't get this feeling that there's real sincerity there, that he had practiced, that this was over rehearsed of something that he didn't actually believe in, And maybe he was even coached. Someone was like, you should definitely try to say this in a way that you sound sincere. And what does it come off as? Totally unsincere. Rifat talks about, unfortunately, this is how I've seen most people apologize on social media. It's true. There's lots of jokes out there of terrible non-apology apologies. Oh, right. And MacArthur, you said it. Yeah, it sounds like one of those court-ordered apologies. There wasn't any heart in it. Agria, you've got some suggestions. There should be maybe more pauses, as if the apology was serious. We're trying to coach the non-serious apology into to at least sound more serious. He could take more time to collect his thoughts and to say the right thing. An apology not having pauses feels like it's planned with precision beforehand. Dang. I think that's an incisive diagnosis of what has been going wrong here. So the fix, of course, is around authenticity with your body language. So feeling confident, feeling prepared, feeling like you've rehearsed, and that you're actually willing to show up as yourself for the presentation that you're going to give. And I honestly underline and emphasize, rehearse. Take some time beforehand to watch yourself, see how this is coming off. Maybe if you've got someone who knows you well and who would be willing to take 15, 20 minutes to listen to your presentation, go through it, get some feedback, see if there's moments where they're like, ooh, you seem like you've gone a little bit off track. And this all contributes to the likability factor, which we were talking about earlier too. Research shows that people are more likely to listen to and believe speakers that they find likable. So some of the things that you had already talked about that you had flagged in your own speeches turn people off. Apologizing before you begin in the way that Remy thought, that was an analog to what Remy had said. Hey, I'm actually not the person who's supposed to be speaking to you. I'm the backup, but anyway, here we go. It automatically kind of puts people back in their seats. Vulnerability, when used in an appropriate way, can build connection. Narrative can do that. Simply smiling, having enthusiasm about your topic, being approachable for questions. As we talked about with the non-apology guy, being able to vary your eye contact as you move through the piece so that you're not just locked in as the RoboCop. And as you rehearse, not just getting feedback from others, but getting that feedback from yourself, that the speech that you are giving feels natural and comprehensible in your own voice. Because if it's not something that sounds like the way that you would speak, change it. Make it feel authentically in your voice. Otherwise, there's always going to be that slight disconnect that you're reaching for and trying to be someone that you're not. And audiences may not go, I feel like she doesn't quite comprehend that or understand that or care that much about that. But they will go, I don't know why I'm not connecting with this, but I'm not connecting with this. And then find moments to listen. Open your speech with a poll, invite a question. Remember that your audience seeks to understand you. So are you playing your part in bridging that gap of understanding? Before we adjourn, I want to do just a couple practices to give you an opportunity to kind of go off the deep end into what it feels like to be bad, disconnected, and how we can find our way back from that. So can I if I were to give you a piece of text to read, can I get a volunteer who can, who would be willing to read it for us? I'll send it to you on the chat. Anybody feeling particularly performative right now? Yes, Zaina, thank you. All right, I'm gonna drop in the chat a piece that is quite technical. And I know that you're not going to have a chance really to read it ahead of time. But will you deliver this to us as charismatically as you can?
I'll give it a shot. All righty. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this deep dive into the quantum computing landscape. Today, we're going to explore the latest advancements in quantum algorithms, particularly in the realm of Shor's algorithm for integral factorization and its implications for RSA cryptology. We'll also examine the role of quantum entanglement in the era of correction protocols, focusing on surface codes and the use of topological qubits to mitigate discoherence in the non-abelian aeons. The fundamental principles of superposition and quantum tunneling underpin the progress of quantum parallelism, which is critical for accelerating exponential complexity reductions in NP-complete problems.
Zaina, you did a magnificent job. Round of applause. And Zaina is for those of you who don't know, she's a talented speaker, a speech and debate award-winning speaker. So the quality of how she spoke to us, I think, was fantastic. I knew that your charisma would shine through. But what was the problem in understanding what it is that she said? Actually, Lone, I'm going to put you on the spot because you just added something to the chat. What did you mean by that?
Well, she came off as quite charismatic. It sounded like she knew exactly what she was talking about. I was engaged the whole time. I don't know if it's specifically because the subject area is it's an area that's been buzzing quite a bit recently, or it's just that natural charisma came out. But I enjoyed it very much, but there was a lot of jargon in there. So you kind of, it was a mix, but it, I was still intrigued to want to know, okay, wait, why are we focusing on this? Why is this interesting? What leaps have you made in this area? So I got that sense. I was excited by the topic, but half of it, or maybe a third of it, might have gone right over my head. And then, yeah.
Yeah. But and your point in the chat, where do I sign up for Series A? There was still something professional and compelling. Maybe we didn't understand everything that she was saying, but she sure seemed like she knew what she was talking about, and maybe I'll be able to catch up with that later. Yeah, Zaina.
For me, I kind of had to channel my old science teacher persona that I used, and as Lone pointed out correctly, jargon heavy. This, as I try to make this as engaging as possible, trying to keep people interested. But if people don't know what the terminology is, or what you're talking about, or you can't make it relatable to what people understand, like Lone was saying, no one's going to really know what you're talking about. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do the best I can with this. And yes, this does sound really interesting, but this is very, like I said, jargon heavy. The biggest thing is trying to make it so that people can understand. I can remember a long time ago, I was given advice, because I used to teach high school students, was that if you cannot break it down in a sense to where a young child could understand this, then maybe it's like you have to really mitigate or really think about your audience and who you're talking to. If I was giving this to a council of professionals who are experts in their field, probably feel comfortable doing this. For myself, I was like, okay, I understand just like a couple of these things, but what are some of these things?
Well, and MacArthur even dropped in the chat that he noticed that he noticed your facial expressions where, as the word was coming out of your mouth, you were like, huh? Like you were reading one of the complex words. Incredible that she did it with a straight face for most of the text, though. Yeah, absolutely. Because as you all saw, I sent her that complex piece of text, and she just had to go with it. It is a testament to her ability, as Rifat points out, to pause in places where there were shifts in the narrative, to try to wrestle that complex text into something comprehensible. Well done, Zane. I knew that you would do a wonderful job with that. Before we leave, I'm just going to show you maybe like the pinnacle of like, let's not do this.
Okay, so what is the $64,000 question? Holy cow, I'm going to have to tough it up now. Here we go. What's the $64,000 question for the field? What is the most asked question that I've received this week? What the hell are we supposed to do about .NET, Steve? It's a very good question, and it's got a very, very clear answer. Developers. The key to .NET, the key to industry transformation, the key to success is developers, 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 developers.
We'll stop it right there because I think we've already gotten enough. Let alone, I have no idea why he's sweating from absolutely every single corner of his shirt. There's so many things there that could be improved upon, right? He's granted in a big hall, but he's screaming in a way that is stretching the limits of his voice. Right, Remy talks about being a bit like a preacher, Rafat, worried that he'll drop dead at any moment. It hurts the entirety of me to keep engaged from ears to soul. He asks a question of his audience and then answers it himself, like doesn't offer anything, any sort of engagement. He just pushes. Ayushi saying he's screaming so much, I almost wanted to apologize. Yeah, my goodness. Too much energy, too little relatability, bad body language. The way it's presented through that excessive shouting, erratic movement makes it hard to process or take seriously. Shrishti, you said this seems a little bit like we're being scolded or perhaps trying to convince us to believe a conspiracy theory. And yet it was a Microsoft shareholder meeting. When Megan earlier was talking about like the need for there to be coherence in tech communication, it's because this is what the antecedent is. This is what the history of it has been, but we can do better. So what should we take away? Always practicing authenticity in what we're speaking, simplifying our language, avoiding jargon and complexity, focusing on what the key message is at the time, and then aligning your delivery with your message so that you feel confident, so that your eye contact, your tone of voice, the gestures that you have align with the delivery of your message. And so I'll encourage each of you to think about what is one communication trait that you will start practicing today. Thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your day.